after many questions, I've been asked to do these undisguised now, so I don't give a shit. So it's undisguised. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and stuff. I hope you can fucking understand them now, because people are moaning. Hello, my name's Will. I did work for a stint with the army, and part of my job was to go and get information out of people who didn't want to share that information. I'm a real werewolf. If you've listened to the rest of the interviews, I think this is interview 19, you will hear the story about how I was captured by the army, what they made me do, how they treated me, how they turned me into a weaponized monster. So I've written this down because I wanted to tell you the whole story, and if I just burble on, it won't be good. If you can't understand what I'm saying, I'm sorry. I've had to disguise my voice. The what's it called? The subtitle things on YouTube are pretty good. Also, the transcriptions for all these interviews are over on www.werewolf.host. Okay, so that's www.werewolf.host, and that's in the description. Okay, so I don't know why I'm trying to explain that, because if you can't understand me, you won't understand that. But anyway, I'm going to get on with my story. So this was me being taken in to New York to deal with a gangster that was there. He was pretty high level, and it was my job to try and extract as much information as I could out of him. He'd been held and looked after properly for a while, and he hadn't said anything, so they brought me in to do it. So I'm going to tell you the story anyway, okay? And we'll start halfway through. The gangster'd finally told everything. He'd ratted on his bosses. He'd given all the details that would be required to bring down them and their organisation. Frankly, it was all a little dull. I was again the last straw to gather the information needed. In this case, I had not even used my wolfy self to tease it out of him, but the simple, horrific tortures which humans seem unable to carry out on other humans. Unlike other men, I liked my work, so the slow breakdown both physically and mentally of the big fat gangster was fun. Most would not be able to stomach what was just an enjoyable part of my day. I'd even brought my favourite coffee mug as part of my kit, world's best torturer, all emblazoned all over it. He was a jerk from New Jersey. His hair black and slicked back, and a thick accent that was difficult for me to decipher as a northerner. I was not sure he was even speaking English at first, but I did get used to it after a bit of time with him until he went quiet. I can't do the accent, but I'll say what he said. "Who the fuck do you think you are, bub? You ain't going to get me to blab. I'm of Italian blood. We don't blab on our own." He was quite animate in his seat, and I could see his discomfort at being restrained. "You's made a big mistake. I seen you's all yous. You're dead. Your wife is dead. Your mama's dead. Everyone you ever spoke to is dead." He finished his statement by spitting in my face. He was a living cliché. I smiled, wiping the spit from my cheek onto the back of my hand, and then into my mouth. It tasted of tobacco and garlic. His face was filled with disgust, and he tried to back further into his chair. He'd gone very quiet after I simply ate his spit. He did not know what to do after my reaction to this huge insult of him spitting in my face. A calm, uncaring reaction was not what he wanted. I kept smiling at him as I walked towards him. I could sense a drop in his confidence as he tried to work out what he was going to do next. I hoped he realised at this point that he was properly fucked, although he seemed to lack intelligence, so I thought that it may take a while for him to get to the point of no hope. He changed tack as I readied my tools. I was focused on my work. Fenrir, my posit, that's the ghost wolf side of me, it's a separate soul, and please go back and listen to the story about Fenrir, okay? He's like a ghost werewolf. I absorb him to become my werewolf, and then we're two separate entities, but just please go back and listen to the other stuff. I can't be asked going through it again. Fenrir sat directly in the front of the guy as the man watched with horror. I could flick my attention from Fenrir's view, so I can see through Fenrir's eyes, and the big wolfy ghost was sat in front of the guy, and I can use his eyes as I'm working somewhere else, so we can share links telepathically. Fenrir's view, I could see what he was doing, and yeah, A lot of this preliminary psychological work was setting the scene and beginning that aspect to the torture. Then the guy started speaking again. "What you doing here, man? I can make you rich beyond your dreams, brother. Why are you working for these palookas?" Fenrir was laughing at him at this point. By the way, he won't be able to see Fenrir, only I can. "I heard his accent before on TV, Will." This is what Fenrir is saying. "I heard his accent before on TV, Will, but never believed that it would actually be real like this. Is this really how these guys talk? Do his family think that this is normal?" I smiled, but not at the man, at the posit. The man must have thought I was laughing at him. "You laughing at me, bub? Just let me out of this and we will duke it out man to man," he shouted. Fen laughed, so I laughed. "Yous wouldn't be laughing if I was free, my man," he said. I was suddenly stood next to him. I moved so fast that he did not have time to react. I had a scalpel in my hand and the scalpel blade was resting on the cornea of his eye. I wiped it smoothly over the cornea before he had time to blink. He went instantly still. There was no sound, no movement, no nothing. It was in his vision, and I smiled. "Please only speak when I ask you to. This is going to be a horrific business already. You are going to be cut, ripped, hurt, burned, beaten, and battered. Believe it or not, I can make it harder or easier for you. I really can. I will give you a quick taste of the misery I am going to give you. All this treatment is not to make you talk in any way honestly. This is just for your own education." I lowered the scalpel blade to his chest and slashed it back and forth across his chest at such speed and ferocity that he could not keep up with the speed of the blade. I only cut very shallowly into the flesh, just through his shirt and the top layer of the skin. He screamed and yelled at me to stop, but I continued because it was fun to see how fast I could go. The blade was flashing over the surface of his chest and abdomen, blood, flesh and cotton flew, forming a slight red mist as I worked. He shouted, "Stop, stop, please stop," and then it turned into crying mumbles. I eventually stopped, I think. I'd made my point. He was looking at me, but it was a blank stare. No cocky jibes now, just a lolling head that was just about on the edge of sensibility. I needed him awake and aware, so I took a litre of rubbing alcohol and poured about half of it onto the open cuts of his chest. He woke up screaming blue murder. It was wonderful. I love it. The alcohol must have been excruciating on the cuts, but it had a bonus effect of causing the vasodilation in the bleeding vessels, and because of this, the loss of blood slowed. He now lay in a tattered shirt on a dentist's chair. His messed up flesh matched his messed up shirt. In fact, the blood, flesh and shirt material were difficult to distinguish. This was so much fun. He was now aware of me again. His eyes were bulging and full of fear. I pointed to the bottle of alcohol. His head turns towards it. I gave him some time to read the label. He read it and looked at me. I then took my lighter, flicking it open and producing a naked flame. My face was directly behind the flame. I gave him a big smile and nodded at him, flourishing the Zippo near him. He soon realised the threat of the flame and the alcohol, and he panicked once more. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Sadly, after that simple act, he had been incredibly easy to break. It was so disappointing. I mean, this was supposed to be one of those mafia hardmen, those that would rather die than become a dirty rat. I had read this guy's resume of violent crimes. I mean, he was on par with me if it was true. Well, not on a par, but maybe not obviously of the same calibre. So I did not expect him to be what these gangsters say, add the thick Jersey accent yourself, a pussy. I had taken his nails from his fingers at first. Gosh, did he scream. I mean, it was hilarious in that accent of his. Fenrir, my posit, was just about to wee himself if he could. Then I took the nails from his toes. I did not need the usual pliers and the torturer's uses. I would lift them off with a handy extendable claw by slowly pushing the tip of the claw beneath the nail. If I was careful, it would slowly separate the nail from the nail bed as it extended, tearing them slowly apart. Then, using a flicking motion, I could rip it from the toe. I'd removed 3 of them cleanly first try. The others took a little more pulling and tearing to remove. He had not liked it at all and was willing to talk after removing 6 fingernails, but I needed to get some symmetry. I do suffer from OCD. Once all the nails were removed, I allowed the 2 detectives in. He then promptly gave the detectives everything they needed to know. What a disappointment. What a fucking lightweight. We just sat behind him in disgust, slowly cleaning up. And then he said, "Now get that fucking psycho away from me. I'll remember your face, man. You will never be able to live a normal life again, you fucking faggot," he monologued. I just smiled and nodded and stuck my tongue out while looking at him. Childish, yes, but fucking funny. The officers then left to go over the info in another room. This was a cosmic mistake on their part. Their mistake was to leave him here with me, because I accidentally removed his eyelids with a scalpel for fun. Maybe I should have held off until they got back to me, but I do have ADHD, so I was bored. So it's not my fault. It's a medical condition, and they left him here. Technically, it was their fault, just saying. He was yelling and saying he had done all that was asked of him, but I needed to continue with my artwork. I mean, this was not all about him, was it? And then I told him, "All the better to see me with, my dear. You have to try and make your clients laugh." He fucking didn't. Obviously no sense of humour. It takes a steady hand to get the eyelids cut off correctly and in one piece. A firm grip has to be held on the head, otherwise they wiggle too much. This tends to be the reason I do it first, as the lack of sweat and blood on the skin gives a firm grip for delicate work. The noises he made as I removed the lids were incredible. Can you imagine the horror of watching someone slice off your eyelids? You would not be able to look away, would you? Get it? Not look away. I'm so fucking funny at times. His eyeballs were the only things that could move as I held his head. They followed the path of the slicing scalpel, the blade sliding over the smooth surface of the eyeball, lifting the lid and then slicing it neatly. This is a difficult thing to do, people. Imagine having to hold his head still and work with a sharp blade in the other like a surgeon, but I was better. Also, I would have to stop every so often, put down the blade and rinse the blood from his orbits, otherwise he could not see the work taking place. It was a shame it was over so quick, but now he could not escape seeing anything else I did to him as long as I kept his eyes damp. No closing his eyes and going to his happy place. Stay here with me and mine. I then managed to remove his lips in a perfect O with no breaks in the flesh. It was the first time I'd managed to do that, and I wore the result as a bangle on my right wrist. I still have it somewhere. Oh, I only did this after he had talked. I'm not an idiot. Although I have made that mistake in the past, you soon learn it's really difficult to understand a lipless man. The whistle of his lipless mouth was now annoying me as he breathed, so I grabbed the upper incisors between finger and thumb and tried to wrench them out. It did not really work as they just snapped and broke into small bits that the fucker nearly choked on, actually. It stopped the annoying whistle. The two detectives came back into the room, focusing on the paperwork they had in their hands and the heated conversation they were having. As they got to me, I had masked the man's body by standing in front of it, so they could not see the mess sitting there. As they got closer, I felt a little bit shifty about my actions, but stepped out of the way so they could see what had happened. I said, "This happened while you were out. I hope you don't mind. I was bored and had nothing to do," so I pointed at the macabre face in the chair. Both their jaws dropped open and there was silence and disbelief for the first few moments. He can probably still write if we need any more info from him," I said. I have to admit I was somewhat embarrassed. One of the men threw up on the spot, his mighty chunder going everywhere. The other one looked at me and pointed his hand holding a pencil at the man in the chair. "What the fuck? What the fuck have you done, you fucking animal?" he stuttered. Now this pissed me off a little. I mean, I know I should not have done it. I mean, they had to realise that this was their fucking fault. They had left me with nothing to do and unsupervised. So I made eye contact with the rude detective and asked him nicely, "Do you want to be next, you judgmental fuck?" I emphasised my sentence holding a pointy thing from the kit, the pointy bit doing the emphasising. The more perceptive detective... That's great, isn't it? The more perceptive detective reached out for his partner and grabbed his jacket at the elbow and started to drag him away from me slowly. I could see by his demeanour that he thought I was going to now murder them. I was pretty sure I was not, but who knew? I don't think that even I knew if I was going to kill him. I was quite perturbed, to say the least. Will, this is the guy talking to me, Will, he did not mean anything by it. It was our fault. All the blame goes on our shoulders. He was just shocked. He's never seen such a wonderful bit of work. You know, the first time people see your work, they react very emotionally. It is your gift. I smiled and nodded with emotion thanks. I knew he was talking shit, but I appreciated the shit that he talked, so I continued to clean the blood off my sharp toys. I get it. He just lost his mind a little, I said, looking at the meat in the chair. Beauty really can make you react very strongly. I gave a long sigh and folded my arms as I looked upon the devastation of the former gangster. Turning back to the rude detective, I made a point. Hey man, I forgive you for your outburst. Emotions are strong things, but fuck up again and I will leave you worse than this. In your home, out at Rosebank Clifton Avenue, with your kids Beatrice and Noah. I will cut their eyelids off as well, so they see Daddy in a whole different way. I smiled at him. He just stood there silently. He did not know what to do. His face dropped, and he looked at the floor, and he slowly started reaching for his gun. I smiled, trying to get eye contact. This could be so much fun. Come on, John, said the other policeman as he held his partner by the hand and tried to remove the visibly wobbled man from the room. Let's get out of here and leave Will to clean his kit. I let them go. I let them almost get to the door, listening to the man being led mumble to the other. I heard it all he was saying, and it was not nice, and it was about me. So just as he got to the door, I shouted, "Stop now! He has to apologise to me before he goes." They stumbled to a halt. I pointed at the mumbling man very dramatically. I said, he has to fucking apologise to me. The man helping his friend looked him in the eye and nodded. The other guy looked destroyed. He had tears building in his eyes and the stress lined his face. I could see that he was dealing with the lack of fairness in this position, the fact that I had all the power, and that was killing him, while I was getting off on it, to be honest. I will only ask one more time, then I will rip him, I pointed at the now wobbly detective, into tiny parts and feed them to you. And I smiled, pointing at the nice friendly partner. Fucking apologise, I ordered. The man who was the shaking focus point for my mental abuse looked at me. He had become a crippled, pathetic waste of life. He tried to speak. Nothing came. He licked his lips and he tried again. I am really sorry, Will, he muttered. There, that was okay. Thanks. I was only fucking with you anyways. I actually like you two. My posture and body language becoming friendly once more. Oh, and can you get me a coffee, please? Flat white, thanks. The two men then left, one supporting the other. The nice supported detective came back with my coffee about 15 minutes later. I sniffed it for tempering, for spit and stuff, but it was clean, and then he asked me to finish the job, leaving the victim alive but unable to communicate. They wanted me to make the session look like some gang world type of hit that would offer a warning. They wanted me to commit an act so brutal that it would put fear into those hardened by years of living in a world of violence themselves. So I sat and thought about what to do. I needed to get myself in the fucking zone. The man's face was already a horror show, but I needed more. I started pacing up and down in front of the chair, back and forth, back and forth. My head was full of things that I'd done in the past, but I would try to surpass them. I started slapping myself around the face and yelling my wants. Come on, monster. Come on, torture. Come on, pain. I stopped directly in front of the slobbering ghoul ululating. Can't even say that. Ululating in his chair, and I grabbed him by his long luscious hair and brought my nose to his. I looked deep into his forever open eyes and started to scream as loud as I could into his pitiful visage. I was impressed he still had the wherewithal to try and flinch away. The exhilaration was phenomenal. This was better than any drug. As the scream died away, I let go of his mane and knelt in front of him. My chin had dropped to my chest and I laughed, smiled and told him that the next few minutes would be extraordinary for him and for me. I thanked him for his part in this. Tears came from my eyes as I looked at him. I shook him by his damaged hand and thanked him again. I would be ready to finish a masterpiece of artwork that would always be remembered. I selected something fun from the kit. It was a blowtorch. I lit the gas and gently wafted it over his scalp. I allowed it to singe his hair at first, then blister his skin. The stench of burning hair was repugnant, still the result was pleasant destruction of his form. He desperately tried to move his head away from the heat and the pain, and the noises he produced were eulogies of pleasure. Well, for me, screams and moans. They were sounds of those burned in hell, I imagine. I next deafened him using a Phillips screwdriver, bursting his eardrums on both sides of his head and forcing it just a little deeper to damage those ossicles. Those are the little bones in the middle ear. He screamed in what for him was now a silent scream, but to me was a beautiful song, although he was getting hoarse from the damaging volume he was producing. I manipulated and twisted the end of the screwdriver in his ear, scrambling the contents of it thoroughly. I still wonder what sensations he got from this. Was it just pain, or was it a mix of grinding and crunching sounds as I broke the bones up? The noise he created as I did this racked his body, and he shook and went into shock. It was amazing to think that he could not hear himself. I suppose he would have felt sound ripple through his chest cavity and throat. The noise was unhuman, it just sounded weird. He had no fucking lips, did he? So it was really odd. There was no termination of the sound at the end of the noises. He just uttered noise. It just stopped. Ah! Lips do a lot to round out your speech, I'd not realised. He still stared at me through blood-soaked and lidless eyes. Well, he did not have a choice, really. The stare was so intense and dull-like that I really had no idea how much he could see now, as I suppose those eyes would be so dry and irritated without the ability to blink. I hoped he could still see something of me. I am a magnificent bastard. I kept rinsing his face down with water every so often, and I hoped that this would help him see a little. He was very mobile in the chair, even though he was securely tied. Jerky movements, consistent jerky movements. I thought he may be convulsing, but I think he was just out of control. Eventually he calmed and looked at me. I mimed his flappy screaming reactions back to him. Oh, how I laughed. He seemed to have no sense of humour though, just so serious. Eventually I got a little bored with the noisy man. Honestly, there is only so much yelling I can take. They have no consideration for my sensitive ears, and the kit would include earplugs for the next job. You see, I'm always learning. As he opened his mouth wide to let go of one of his pain yodels, I wrenched at the lower jaw, ripping it downwards. I felt it break on the left and dislocate with a pop on the right. His noise now changed to his injury, uncontrolled and brutalised, a beautiful sound that issued from this lipless orifice. Sadly, he passed out from the pain. I quickly pumped a little morphine into him so he could not pass out with pain again. I also gave him a little cocktail of my own insulin and adrenaline. He woke up in response to the morphine. He woke up, but in response to the morphine, he became a bleary-eyed zombie as he absorbed the opiates into his ravished system through the cannula in his left arm, but he was now wide awake with it. The other arm still had the empty plasma bag hooked into its cannula, and it looked like I may need to give him some more fluids to survive the next few minutes. I hope I'd not gone too far with the damage. It would be shit if he died from blood loss at this point. Not very professional looking, but to be honest, who's going to tell me off? I didn't think that if he survived that he would ever be able to hear or speak again, but he could still maybe write or maybe do sign language or some shit like that. Gangsters throwing gang signs, man, so gangster. I looked through the kit that I had for the interview process. In the kit was a hammer, one side of the head flat, the other rounded. Nice. I weighed it in my hand and gave it a couple of hefts, as it were. It felt really nice. I took his right hand, which he pathetically tried to wrench away from me. No, I said, stroking his forehead and reaching for his hand again. Give it here, you big silly. As I stroked his head and smiled at him, he looked at me with an imploring, lipless stare. Oh, he tried to say, bless him. It took me a few moments to realise this was him actually saying no, but it sounded like, oh. He could not pronounce the N with his damaged jaw. Again, I was amazed how much of a difference it makes. I took the hand and pinned it by the wrist to the table. Starting at the tips of his index finger, I worked my way down it. I would rhythmically hit each chosen spot using the Queen classic I Want It All as my soundtrack and punctuation for a time stroke. I would hit each chosen spot a few times until I got the crunchy bone that I wanted. Following this, hit with one more strike just to finish the crushing job. After each spot had been worked, I moved another half inch down to repeat the action. I reminded myself of a piano tuner that I'd once seen work. The strings being the fingers, the note off key being issued by the man's wrecked throat. I continued methodically through the rest of his hand, only realising after breaking his last knuckle of his pinky that simply snipping off the thumbs would have sufficed. I was wasting time, although as the beautiful John Lennon said, the time you've enjoyed wasting is not wasted time. See, that was my Scouse accent, I can do that. Once I'd finished with his hand, I lay it on his lap and got out what was just an ordinary pair of secateurs. I made sure he saw them before I used them, giving them a couple of squeezes in front of him. His eyes followed the sharp tool as I brought it down and let him watch as I removed the thumb of the other hand. It was a little bit messier as the secateurs took a lot of effort to get through the joint at the base of the thumb. It's a sturdy, strong joint, and it led to a lot of blood loss, so I sealed the wound with adrenaline from a bottle that was in my kit. It is useful in constricting cut vessels at the surface of the skin. The man had passed out, so smelling salts were wafted below his nose to shock him awake. He woke and shook his head and drooped. Oh shit, he's dead. Again I walked to the door and asked the two waiting officers for a medic. Apparently the medic was not available after the last time he came in, so I had to go back and hopefully wait for the man to awake. As I walked back to the seat he sat on, wiping my hands on my apron. He mumbled and turned his head. There was a knock on the door and one of the detectives was waiting there for me. He has to be dropped off in the next 10 minutes, Will. Okay, I said. Nearly finished. I looked around the room for my next bit of joy-promoting kit. 1/4-inch plastic pipe, barbed wire and petroleum jelly. I took the pipe and a piece of barbed wire and noticed that the barbed wire would thread through the pipe. I was going to give him a barbed wire necklace. But I had a better idea. I took the jelly and smeared it over the end of the pipe. Then going back over to the man, I pulled his trousers down and his extremely wet underpants to expose his backside. At least he had not shit himself, and urine was still alright. I separated his knees wide and rolled him onto his right side. I now had the access I needed. I showed him the tub and started to add extra lube in front of him. His panic took a while to arrive in his state. He took some time to work out what was going to happen. I mimed the procedure once more and gave him a smile and a thumbs up. Sorry man, you cannot do that, can you? I said, because he had no thumbs. I laughed. Fenrir laughed. He shook his head and struggled a little as I inserted the tip of the pipe, pushing it a good 6 inches into the man. He hardly responded after that, only quivering a little at the invasion. I slipped the barbed wire into the pipe and pushed it through until it could be pushed no further. Then I gently removed the pipe, sliding it over the barbed wire that stayed in place inside the sphincter of his anus. Well, that was going to be an interesting problem for the surgeons. How would they remove that without causing catastrophic damage? I think that was definitely the gangland violence level. I walked over to the door and knocked. The officer answered and looked me in the eyes. I would get that ambulance sorted out now if I were you, I said, wiping my hands on my apron. Oh, and can you book me a taxi, thanks? I looked in the mirror by the door and there I was, a blood-spattered, happy smile. I think he's ready. Oh, and can I get a copy of the CCTV tape for my collection, please?